A century ago, Britain held control of a particularly interesting slice of the Middle East pizza, if you will. The Ottoman Empire was dying, and after World War One, Britain took control of a slice of that Ottoman Empire, Ottoman territory. This was called the British Mandate for Palestine, and today I'm going to go through the history of it briefly, but my briefly, admittedly, is long enough to finish a cup of tea, at least one cup. So bookmark this when you want a history podcast, not when you're wanting something quick and snappy, or if you do have time and you're interested, for the history without the Western spin. That's right. Check the channel you're watching this on. It's not the same the geopolitics channel. It's a different channel. So if you do have time and are willing, sit down, get cozy with a cup of tea. Pretend this is a cup of tea. Yeah, pretend this is a cup of tea, and join me as we meander through the pages of history, unbiased, of course, and without the Western spin. It's the 1910s or 1920s. The British took control of a land where Arab Palestinians made up over 90% of the population. This is the western part of the Mandate. The eastern part would later become Jordan. But Britain had made conflicting promises during World War One before they got control of this territory. They told the Arabs in the region, they told the Arabs, or the Arabs, if you want to pronounce it absolutely crazy, that if we work together, chaps, you and us, and we win, we give you guys independence, self rule, instead of being told what to do from flipping Istanbul. Help us defeat the Ottomans, and you won't have to answer to the blasted Turks anymore. That was the deal. Pinky promise, I swear upon the tea I love to drink so much. Then, secondly, they made the British another promise, a Jewish homeland for, obviously, the Jews in the famous Balfour Declaration. Where would this homeland be? Historic Palestine. Again, promise the same land to two groups of people. Promise first, then get the land and the victory, then apologize later, or don't apologize, depending on how strong the people you've broken the agreement with are. If they're not that strong, you don't need to apologize. You can just gloss over it, sweep it under the carpet, carry on drinking tea the way you were doing before. Quite a tried and tested British method, for better or worse. I'm just being analytical here and historical without the Western spin. Now, this contradiction, this double dealings by the British would define the next century of this land, the Mandate years, as it were. You know, the land under the control, the Palestinian territory under the control of the British, these years saw massive demographic shifts as Jewish immigration surged into the region, especially after obviously 1930s Germany and a certain mustachioed bad guy. He pulled up into Europe and then pulled all of Europe into the Second World War. Obviously, that was not good for the Jewish people, so the immigration to Palestine not escalated, accelerated. By 1936, Jews comprised 28% of the population in historic Palestine. Remember, I said when the British first showed up, it was 90% Palestinian Arabs, right? Now, the natives, as a result of this mass immigration and the prioritizing of the welfare of the immigrants, not the natives were under severe strain and there was huge civil unrest. Britain obviously did the right thing, heard the natives, and addressed their concerns. I'm kidding. Britain crushed this uprising by the natives with overwhelming force. But after the Second World War, Britain was a smoking husk of ash and fatigue. Its crown jewel, even, India, had to be let go because the home islands of Britain back in Europe could no longer hold on. They just didn't have the power. The only power really left was the Soviet Union in the Far East and the United States across the Atlantic. Britain, France, Western Europe overall was a smoking pile of ash and ruin. The same was true for Palestine, what I said about India. Britain wasn't strong enough to hold on to their crown jewel. It certainly wasn't strong enough to hold on to the other parts, Australia, Canada, British mandate in Palestine included. So, exhausted, Britain handed the problem they created in Palestine by promising it to five different people, and even, the land they promised technically is not theirs anyway, but they won it from the Ottoman Empire. So, The problem they created, they handed over to the United Nations. You guys can deal with it, right? And the United Nations proposed partitioning Palestine into separate Jewish and Arab states. Now, Palestinians, the natives, and the Arab nations in the region rejected the plan. They said, why should we give up 55% of the homeland for this particular group of Arabs to accommodate just 30% of the population, the Jewish population that was brought in from Europe? And that too, the population that's an immigrant population. Why would the immigrants get the majority of the land? Why should they get any land? This was obviously the reason why the Arab states flat out rejected this partition plan. Now, analytically speaking, the rejection of the deal of partition was based on emotion and what was right, right? What's right to the Arab people, not what was practical. For better or worse, I'm not attacking the Arab rejection. I'm not supporting the Arab rejection. I'm just giving you the analysis, the history without the spin. Then you go off, you do some further research if you want. You decide what side you sit on, if any side. Maybe you just want to be an observer. Now, the Arab states didn't have the ability to fight back against partition. This is why I'm saying the decision, their resistance against the plan was emotional, not practical. They couldn't stop it if it went through. And it did go through. The British and then the Americans provided the immigrant Jewish population significant support. So the emotional response by the Arabs was, hell no, you can't have our land. But practically, the split took place anyway. The Arabs couldn't stop it. The split didn't rely on regional Arab or local Palestinian green lighting. The Jewish people supported by the British who gave them the land, they said, okay, we want it. We want this play. Obviously, they want this play. You just show up in a country, right? You make up a third of the population, but you're given over half the land to be your own new country. You're going to be like, yeah, say no more. I'm happy with that. Let's go, bruv. And they got happy. They got happy. Fine. I'm not surprised. So on the 14th of May, 1948, as British forces withdrew, saying, this is your problem now, Yoko, you only colonized once, I'm going. David Ben-Gurion declared Israel's independence as the British left. The Arab states rejected it, and the ensuing war that resulted from it saw Israeli forces win, basically, against the Arab neighbors that they now have. And they went beyond the UN partition lines because why stop at 55%? We're winning. We're winning. Keep going, girl. Bruv, keep going. Let's keep going. Herzl, come with me. I don't know. Just pick a random Israeli name. They were winning, so they went beyond the 55% that the UN suggested, and they ended up controlling 78% of historic Palestine. Now, military occupation obviously leads to potentially harm against civilians, and this was absolutely no exception. Over 700,000 Palestinians fled or were forcibly expelled from their land in what they, the Palestinians, now call the Nakba. Nakba meaning the catastrophe. Interesting framing here, because what the Israelis call their Independence Day, one day later from that, the Palestinians commemorate Nakba Day, the day of catastrophe. So it depends on what side you sit on, you see, how you celebrate or commemorate that time. Now, the gain of the foreign immigrants was the catastrophic loss of the local people. That's the only way the history can be presented without the spin. Right? One side wins, the other side loses. I'm not telling you to pick a side. That's just how it happened, right? Now, you'll probably be on one of those sides and you'll be either happy or sad, right? It is what it is. And the local people who lived on the land continuously for hundreds of years, hundreds of thousands of those people were forced to flee, dispossessed of their land. Those who remained on the land somehow became the minority in their own homeland. These are, to this day, the Arab Israeli citizens, right? They're the Arabs who hold Israeli passports and live in Israel, have to keep their head down, keep their nose clean. They like the wrong post on social media. They say the wrong thing. Knock, knock, knock. Who is it? Israeli, police. What's wrong? Well, you're a Palestinian. You're moving a bit mad these days. Give me your phone. Give me your phone. It's happened, okay? Just look it up. It's widespread, actually. So this is in Israel proper, the core Israeli territory of today. There's still millions of actually Palestinians lying low, as it were, because they have to survive. They're still there. They have to stay well in line, stay quiet. But yes, they're citizens of the Israeli state. Second class, of course. by fact, but they are. Now, a few years later, after the Israeli Declaration of Independence and their expansion beyond the United Nations borders to control 75% of the land, in 1967, quite a few years later, um, in that war, there was another war. Israel's control of historic Palestine, where they occupied the remaining 22%. They already had 78%. The remaining 22% they took in this 6-day war after launching a shock first strike against Israel and its allies in response to Egypt closing the Strait of Tiran, blocking the Eilat port in South Israel. So Egypt blocked the port. Israel, before Egypt blocked the port, Israel said, "You block this port, we're going to see it as a declaration of war." Egypt blocked it anyway. And they said, "Okay, it is war." And they struck first, the Israelis. Struck so hard and so effectively, in fact, they completely wiped out the Egyptian Air Force. While it was on the ground, took it out, by and large. Not fun fact, interesting fact. Eilat port is the one that's now going bankrupt and basically doesn't operate because of Houthi Yemen. But that's modern. We're talking about history. Let's go back. So Israel achieved a strategic win during the 1967 war and held even the Sinai Peninsula beyond historic Palestine. Sinai Peninsula's Egyptian territory. The Israelis held it until the 1970s during the Yom Kippur War, when Egypt and Syria jointly attacked Israel. Egypt caught Israel off guard, and in the resulting fight, the situation was difficult enough for Israel for them to eventually agree to ceasefire terms that included the returning of the Sinai Desert to Egyptian control. So that was, the Yom Kippur War in the 1970s was a military victory for Israel. They had the superior capabilities, the superior intel, the superior technology, military hardware provided by the US, but they did not achieve an outright total win that allowed them to get an unconditional surrender. Far from it. They had to give up land, right? And that was, as a result, one could argue, a military victory for Israel, but a psychological victory and morale booster for the Arab states, because Israel, at the end of that war, had to give back the huge Sinai Desert to Egypt, meaning Israel loses basically the largest strategic depth provider of their whole country. They lose their country's depth if a foreign adversary tries to invade them, and Egypt gains that depth. So it's a huge loss for Israel, but they agreed to it. So on paper, it's clear that it wasn't a outright win for Israel. Now today, Israel exercises effective control over all of historic Palestine through direct sovereignty, the core Israeli territories, right? Or through military occupation of varying degrees in the West Bank, area A, B, and C. Or a siege choking Gaza, where they don't actually fully occupy the territory, but they besiege the territory. They block it off, they cordon it off, they allow certain things in, they don't allow certain other things in. Baby food, don't be crazy, Gazans, you can't have baby food. And obviously, the choking, the besieging of Gaza has been worsened significantly over the last 2 years after October of 2023. It's worse in Gaza now than in fact it has ever been, right the way back to the Nakba. So Israel holds the land. Meanwhile, Palestinians remain stateless, one of the world's largest and longest standing refugee populations. 6 million Palestinians live as refugees globally, or the children of refugees, and they, by their culture, define themselves by and large as refugees too. They say, "My parents are from that land over there. That is our homeland. We were taught when we were children, that is our homeland. Your grandparents lived there, their parents, their parents, their parents." Not some vague, some scripture says 3,000 years ago, I was promised this land. No, 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 no. I have grandparents who lived there. Like, it's very, very close to the land. It's very practical. And so those Palestinian refugees are still in a diaspora. They're still spread out across the world. They're in Turkey, they're in Syria, they're in Jordan, they're in Israel, even some of them displaced. They're in the West Bank, they're in Gaza. Those under Israeli rule, obviously, live to varying degrees of Israeli citizenship. They have either citizenship, or in the West Bank, they don't. They have restricted rights, some rights, not all rights. They're tried differently in courts. They're treated differently in employment and court systems in Israel based on their ethnicity and religion. This is why Israel is accused of apartheid. Long story. Now, summarizing. A century after the British took control, the land continues to bleed. Broken promises, stolen homes, and stolen land, of course, engineered narratives that somehow frame those fighting for the right to stay on their own land. They're apparently the bad guys. That's the framing, that's the spin. And the foreigners who resort at a state level to brutal repression to keep this skewed and unjust reality going, to hopefully, according to the foreigners, to the occupiers, as many describe them, to keep the situation moving in the direction of further encroachment by the occupiers and further loss of land by the natives. To keep that going, they resort to brutal repression, but somehow, remember, framing the spin is they're the victims. Don't forget, they're the victims, right? That's the Western narrative. Nothing justifies October 7th. But October 7th justifies every response. 10,000 people? Why 10,000? 60,000 people. Civilians? Yeah, civilians, that's no problem. Mafi mushkila. Civilians. Well, look at October 7th. They didn't say Mafi mushkila. That's Arabic. But look at October 7th, so we can do whatever we want. But if someone says, well, why was October 7th done? They'll be like, how dare you? Are you saying October 7th is justified? Like I said, October 7th cannot be justified, but October 7th can be used to justify everything. A shocking distortion. Now, the Western narrative is Israel had the right to exist, has the right to exist, and defend itself, don't forget, of course. But Palestine does not have the right to exist, and Palestinians don't have the right to defend themselves. Another shocking distortion. Why would the foreigners have a right to defend themselves in foreign lands and the natives not have a right to defend themselves on their own land? Spin much? You spinning yet? Have you stopped spinning? And one of the first and equally shocking distortions, the spin, as the West has taught us all in the English-speaking language. One of the first and most shocking distortions in the region. Denying the existence, really, of a people, which is now spun back at the other side, saying, oh, you don't think, you're trying to erase, the Israeli existence on the land. Well, hear this distortion. A land without a people, for a people without a land. That was the catchy statement used when Jewish immigration took place all those years back, before I was born, before my parents were born, right? A land without a people, for a people without a land. Right from the very start, the hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who had lived here for centuries, whose ancestors were Muslims and Christians and Jews, whose families can be traced back, their lineage can be traced back, unbroken, to the Ottoman era, the Abbasid era before them, the Umayyad era before them. Yeah, burn them all. What lineage? Well, I don't see any lineage. I don't see them be promised any land here. It's a land without a people. For those people, we're not counting those people. Not those, us people. It's a land without us on it. So we need to be on it, like a carb on it, like white on rice. We need to be on it, right? And the people without a land, of course, are those from Eastern Europe. They had land over there, but no, that's not good enough. They're without a land. They need their own land. We, the Europeans, care about you guys. We want you guys to have your own land. But not here, because we love you so much, it needs to be over there. Way over there, right? For the unbiased news and analysis, and on this page, the history without the Western spin, I'm Mahfouz. I hope you enjoyed this one, and I'll see you on the next one.